The air is heavy with dust, and the cries of merchants echo through the crowded streets of Athens. Among the noise of bargaining and the smell of olives and wine, a boy no older than 12 stands trembling. His wrists are bound, his thin frame displayed like a prize animal. The auctioneer's voice cuts through the chaos, shouting prices as hands rise from wealthy men seated in the front. For the boy, this is no marketplace of ideas or democracy. It is a stage of humiliation where his childhood ends. Imagine for a moment, what if your own son, your own brother, were stripped of his name and sold under the very same sky where philosophers spoke of freedom and virtue? This is not the Greece of marble statues and noble ideals. This is the Greece hidden behind the curtain, where beauty was currency and innocence was a commodity. And the boy you see here, he is only at the beginning of a journey far darker than the history books ever told you. But here's the question. How could this happen in the very heart of what we call the cradle of democracy? How could the same civilization that gave us Plato's dialogues and Aristotle's ethics also stand by while children were traded like livestock? We love to picture ancient Greece as a land of philosophers in white robes, debating the meaning of justice under the shade of olive trees. Yet just beyond those marble courtyards, another kind of transaction was taking place, one that stripped away justice, dignity, and freedom. For poor families in the countryside, the choice was brutal but simple: starve together or sell one child to survive. Debt, famine, and failed harvests pushed desperate parents into impossible decisions. The wealthy elite of Athens and other city-states were waiting, ready to buy. To them, beauty and youth were more valuable than gold. Boys with delicate faces and slender frames were prized like rare gems, objects to be displayed, trained, and consumed. This was not a hidden shame whispered about in corners. It was a system, open, accepted, and rationalized by those who considered themselves the most civilized people on earth. The irony is suffocating. The same men who argued endlessly about virtue and the soul at their banquets were the ones who purchased these boys to serve their tables. And far worse. And for the boy we saw moments ago, his new life would not be one of freedom or philosophy, but of confinement, training, and a gradual erasure of everything that once made him human. The auction ends with a final shout. A wealthy man raises his hand, his rings glinting in the sun, and just like that, the boy has a new master. No one cheers, no one weeps. The marketplace simply moves on, as if a human life were no more significant than a loaf of bread. For the boy, however, this moment is the tearing away of everything he has ever known. Dragged through the streets of Athens, he watches the world blur past, temples carved in marble, citizens arguing about politics, laughter spilling from taverns. None of it belongs to him anymore. His name, his family, even his language will soon be stripped away. In their place will come commands, discipline, and the cold indifference of a household that sees him not as a child, but as property. When the gates of his new home swing open, the boy steps into a mansion of stone and silence. He is led down narrow corridors to a small chamber, bare walls, a straw mat, and a single barred window. This is where he will sleep. This is where he will dream, if dreams are still possible. The master does not speak to him directly. Orders are delivered through overseers and older servants. Already the boy understands. He is not meant to have a voice, only to obey. And this was only the beginning, for in the days to come, he would learn that obedience was not enough. He was expected to become something far more disturbing, a tool of pleasure, molded and displayed for the desires of others. The training begins almost immediately. The boy is handed to older servants, themselves once purchased in the same way. They show him how to walk, not as a child, but as a decoration. His steps must be light, his back straight, his eyes lowered. He is taught to pour wine without spilling a drop, to kneel silently when spoken to smile on command. Every mistake is punished, a slap across the face, a night without food, hours forced to stand until his legs buckle. Day by day, the boy's humanity is chipped away. His laughter fades first. Laughter is too loud, too free. then his accent, corrected harshly until his native tongue is buried beneath polished Greek. Soon even his posture no longer belongs to him. His body has been molded into something graceful, submissive, pleasing. The household prepares him not just for service, but for display. Perfumes mask the scent of sweat and fear. Fine clothes are draped over his thin frame, chosen to highlight what the master considers beautiful. He is told to keep his hair long, to keep his skin pale, to remain fragile-looking. He is becoming less of a boy and more of an object, an ornament of flesh meant to impress dinner guests. At night, lying on the straw mat, he stares at the barred window and wonders if anyone in his village still whispers his name. But in Athens, his name is already gone. He is no longer a son, no longer a person. He is a possession, and soon this possession will be presented at gatherings where Greece's greatest minds claim to chase truth and virtue, banquets that revealed a darker truth altogether. The night of the symposium arrives. The boy is led into a grand hall where oil lamps flicker against painted walls, their smoke curling like ghosts above marble floors. Reclining on couches are Athens's most powerful men, philosophers, generals, politicians. Their voices echo with debates about justice, the soul, and the ideal society. To the outside world, this is the pinnacle of Greek culture, the birthplace of democracy, wisdom, and art. But for the boy, the scene is nothing but a stage of contradictions. He moves silently between the couches, pouring wine into goblets, his hands trembling under the weight of expectation. Each time he lowers his gaze, he feels the eyes of men lingering too long, studying him not as a servant, but as a prize. The philosophers speak of virtue while reaching for more drink, of moderation while indulging in excess, of freedom while using children as objects of entertainment. Their words float in the air like noble ideals, but their actions reveal a hunger that corrodes every sentence. The symposium is not just a place for debate, it is a marketplace of flesh, masked by poetry and rhetoric. The boy learns quickly that his role is not only to serve wine, but to serve glances, smiles, and silent compliance. He is both invisible and the center of attention, a paradox that gnaws at his soul. And in this gilded hall, under the very roof where democracy was toasted, a child's innocence is consumed, bit by bit, until nothing remains but silence. Over time, the boy begins to understand that he is no longer seen as a person. In the eyes of his master and the guests who attend these feasts, he has become something else. An ornament, a living trinket, a piece of flesh to be admired and consumed. His name is gone, his history erased. What remains is a role carefully crafted by others, repeated night after night until it feels less like performance and more like fate. He is praised not for who he is, but for how well he pleases. A perfect bow, a timid smile, a graceful step. These are the currencies of his survival. Every gesture is calculated, every movement rehearsed. If he falters, punishment awaits. If he succeeds, he is rewarded with a passing glance, perhaps a morsel of food left on the table. Small mercies that feel like victories in a life stripped of choice. The philosophers who once spoke of the dignity of the soul now treat his body as a vessel for their desires. They celebrate beauty, yet reduce it to a commodity. They toast to freedom, yet keep children like him shackled by invisible chains. And in this cruel paradox, the boy begins to see what he truly is in their world, not a servant, not even a slave, but an object of desire, stripped of will, packaged in silence. The transformation is complete. He has been unmade as a child, remade as a possession, and in the stillness of each night, he wonders, if a person is no longer allowed to choose, to speak, to dream, are they even a person at all? At first, the boy tells himself this is temporary, that one day he might return home, that his family might still be waiting for him. But as months turn into years, hope becomes harder to hold. Memories of his village blur at the edges, the smell of bread baking, the laughter of siblings, the warmth of his mother's hand. Each night, he clings to these fragments, whispering them like prayers into the darkness of his chamber. Yet, with every passing day, those whispers grow fainter. Silence becomes his companion. In the grand halls, he is expected to smile. In the narrow corridors, he is expected to vanish. His feelings, his fears, his longings, none of them matter. To speak them aloud would invite punishment. To share them would invite ridicule. So he buries them deep, and the weight of that silence presses harder than any chain. What wounds him most is not the cruelty of his master, nor the gazes of drunken men. It is the realization that his life, his voice, and his pain mean nothing to those who claim to honor truth and wisdom. They recite poetry about virtue while erasing his humanity. They write philosophies about justice while ignoring the injustice before their very eyes. In this suffocating contradiction, the boy learns the cruelest lesson, that invisibility can be more painful than abuse, for at least abuse acknowledges you exist, and in that bitter truth, his spirit begins to crack. Yet even in the darkest corners of captivity, a spark of resistance flickers. The boy, though stripped of name and freedom, refuses to surrender the last fragments of himself. He begins to carve tiny shapes into the wooden beams of his chamber, symbols only he understands. A bird in flight, a wave cresting on the sea, a flower that reminds him of the hills near his village. To anyone else, they are scratches, meaningless. To him, they are proof that he still remembers, that he still belongs to a world outside these walls. Among the other boys in service, whispers pass like contraband. Late at night, when the halls are quiet and the masters sleep, they share memories of their homes, songs their mothers once sang, stories of rivers and fields they may never see again. Each memory spoken aloud becomes an act of defiance, a refusal to let the system erase them completely. Some write fragments of poetry hidden under straw mats. Others hum old lullabies, their voices trembling but unbroken. These small acts, fragile as they are, form a secret rebellion, a rebellion of memory against oblivion, of humanity against dehumanization. The masters may command their bodies, but not every corner of their souls. For now, that is enough. But the system does not forgive even these tiny acts of survival. And soon, punishment will come. It doesn't take long for the masters to notice. A carved bird discovered on a beam, a scrap of poetry hidden under straw, a whisper overheard in the wrong corridor. To the men of power, these are not harmless gestures. They are threats. A servant who remembers he is human is a servant who might one day refuse. Punishment comes swiftly. One boy is caught humming a song from his homeland. The music is silenced with blows until his lips are swollen and his voice is gone. Another is found with a hidden carving, and for days he is denied food, forced to stand in the courtyard under the burning sun until he collapses. The message is clear. Memory itself is dangerous. To dream is rebellion. The boy watches all of this in silence, his own heart pounding with fear. He learns to keep his scratches smaller, his whispers softer, his glances shorter. But fear cannot erase what burns inside him. Each punishment he witnesses only convinces him further that the masters fear their humanity more than their disobedience. And in that realization lies a grim truth. In this world, survival demands submission, but dignity demands resistance, even if resistance means pain. The boy now knows there is no safe path. To obey is to lose himself. To resist is to suffer. Either way, childhood is gone, replaced by a life that feels like death lived slowly. And yet, an even greater cruelty still waits. For the real tragedy is not only in the punishment of bodies, but in the slow suffocation of the soul. Silence becomes the cruelest punishment of all, not the silence of an empty room, but the silence that swallows every voice, every memory, every trace of who the boy once was. In the great halls of Athens, he is expected to be present, yet invisible, an elegant shadow, a silent decoration. His laughter, his songs, even his questions have been stripped away. What remains is a hollow shell, a body trained to move without a mind allowed to speak. The philosophers boast of freedom, but he is forbidden to utter a single word that belongs to him. The generals boast of courage, yet he is denied even the courage of crying out in pain. And the politicians, who speak endlessly of justice, look past him as if he were a piece of furniture, Their silence toward his suffering is louder than any whip. At night, he lies awake listening to the muffled sobs of other boys in neighboring chambers. No one dares to comfort the other. Even compassion has become dangerous. To reach out, to whisper a name, to admit to pain, any of these could draw punishment. So they suffer in parallel, each isolated in their own cage of silence. This is how the soul dies, not with fire or chains, but with the slow erosion of voice, until even inside your own mind, you are afraid to speak. And yet, beneath this heavy silence, something fragile still lingers. A flicker of memory, a spark of hope in the stillness of those endless nights. When the masters sleep and the lamps burn low, the boys find each other in whispers, through cracks in the walls, through stolen moments in the kitchen, through hurried glances in the courtyard. They pass fragments of their past like sacred treasures. One boy recalls the sound of goats' bells echoing through the hills. Another speaks of the taste of figs ripening in the summer sun. The youngest whispers his mother's lullaby, a melody so fragile it seems it might shatter in the air. For a few precious seconds, they are no longer slaves. They are sons, brothers, children of villages that still exist somewhere beyond the city walls. These memories, fleeting and fragile, become their lifeline. They learn to trade them like currency, each story giving strength to the next. The more they share, the more they resist the erasure that their masters demand. For if they can remember who they were, then the system has not completely won. But even this small rebellion carries danger. The overseers grow suspicious of hushed conversations. A laugh too soft, a tear too visible, could draw punishment. Still, the boys cling to their ritual. To forget is to die twice, once in body, once in spirit. To remember is to survive, even if only in secret. And survival, in a world determined to erase them, is itself a quiet act of defiance. But the quiet defiance of memory cannot shield them from the reality of their fate. Time, as relentless as the overseer's whip, wears their bodies down. Those who were once prized for their beauty grow weary, their faces losing the youthful glow that made them valuable. And in this cruel economy of flesh, beauty is the only currency that matters. The older boys are discarded like worn-out garments. Some are forced into grueling labor, hauling stones under the sun until their bodies collapse. Others are sold again, this time not as ornaments, but as tools, sent to farms, mines, or ships where the work is brutal and the life expectancy short. A few simply vanish, their names never spoken again, their bodies likely left in unmarked graves. Illness takes many. With little care and constant exposure, fevers spread quickly through the servants' quarters. A cough one night becomes silence by morning, the straw mat still warm from a boy who will never return. The masters barely notice. For every child lost, another can be bought, and the system continues, relentless, efficient, merciless. A cycle of beauty, consumption, and disposal, hidden beneath the marble grandeur of Athens. For the boys, there is no growing old, no chance at manhood, no life beyond servitude. Childhood ends the moment they are sold. The rest is only survival, until even survival is denied. And so, behind the legends of democracy and philosophy lies a graveyard of forgotten children, sacrificed to maintain the illusion of civilization. History remembers the marble temples, the golden age of philosophy, the birth of democracy. It remembers the names of great men, Pericles, Socrates, Plato, etched into stone and celebrated for centuries. But it does not remember the boys. Their stories, their cries, their faces are absent from the scrolls and speeches. They were shadows that served the feast but never had a place at the table. The silence is not accidental. It is deliberate. For to preserve the myth of a pure and enlightened Greece, the suffering of children had to be buried. The symposiums are remembered as gatherings of brilliant minds, but the presence of young servants, decorated, silenced, consumed, was scrubbed away. The narrative of greatness cannot tolerate the truth of exploitation. And so, history speaks in half-truths, We inherit the wisdom of Greek philosophy without the bloodstains on the banquet floor. We praise the ideals of democracy while ignoring the children who were denied even the right to their own names. Civilization, as it is recorded, becomes a mirror that reflects only what the powerful want remembered. Yet the stones of Athens still hold secrets. Behind the frescoes of gods and heroes, behind the mosaics that glitter under museum lights, there are missing voices, voices erased not by time, but by choice. And if history tells only half the story, then what we call civilization may be nothing more than a carefully curated illusion. What this story reveals is a truth as old as power itself. Every civilization, no matter how radiant its achievements, is built on foundations of suffering that history prefers to forget. The Greeks gave the world philosophy, art, and democracy. But beneath that brilliance lay a hidden cost paid by the most vulnerable, their children. This is not unique to Athens. It is a pattern repeated across empires and ages. Rome thrived on slaves dragged from conquered lands. The wealth of medieval kingdoms rested on peasants who starved while nobles feasted. Even modern nations celebrated for progress and innovation have built fortunes on the backs of invisible laborers and silenced voices. The lesson is stark. Greatness and cruelty often walk hand in hand. The question is not whether a society achieves wonders, but whether it acknowledges the human cost of those wonders. To look only at the marble temples and not at the children sold beneath their shadow is to believe in a lie that civilization is clean, noble, and just. But when we remember the forgotten, when we allow their stories to be heard, we strip away the illusion. We see civilization for what it truly is, not only the triumph of ideas, but also the record of how we treat the powerless. And how we answer that truth, whether by denial or by compassion, determines what kind of legacy we leave behind. The tragedy of those forgotten boys in Athens is not confined to the past. Look closely at our own world, and the echoes are everywhere. Factories in distant countries where children stitch clothes they will never wear. Mines where small hands dig for the minerals that power our smartphones. Farms where young laborers bend under the weight of harvests that fill foreign tables while their own stomachs remain empty. We tell ourselves civilization has progressed, that we are more enlightened, more humane. Yet behind the glass screens and bright storefronts lies the same bargain Athens once made, the comfort of the powerful purchased at the expense of the powerless. The faces are different, the systems more complex, but the dynamic is hauntingly familiar. And just as Greek philosophers wrote about freedom while ignoring the slaves who served them, today's leaders speak of human rights and prosperity, while millions remain trapped in cycles of exploitation. The silence continues, not because these lives are invisible, but because it is more convenient to look away. The story of ancient Greece warns us that every society chooses what to remember and what to forget. If we only celebrate progress while ignoring the hidden cost, we are repeating the very illusion that buried those boys 2,000 years ago. The question is no longer about Athens. It is about us. What are we willing to overlook, to excuse, to erase, in order to preserve our own myths of progress? The ghosts of Athens whisper a warning. Civilization is judged not by the monuments it builds, but by the way it treats those with no power. The temples of marble have survived. The philosophies still shape our laws. But the silence around those children is the truest measure of Greece's failure. And if we are not careful, the same silence will define us. We live in an age of abundance. Technology connects continents. Medicine extends life. And our comforts would appear godlike to the ancients. Yet the question remains, who pays the price for this abundance? If we enjoy cheap products made by exploited hands, if we scroll through glowing screens powered by suffering mind far away, are we so different from the men reclining at the symposium, toasting virtue while consuming innocence? The responsibility is ours now. We cannot change the fate of the forgotten boys of Athens, but we can decide whether more children today will share their fate. To stay silent is to repeat history, to remember, to act, to refuse to accept exploitation as the hidden tax of progress. That is the only path to a legacy worth leaving. The tragedy of the past is not just a story, it is a mirror. And in that reflection, we must ask, when future generations look back on us, will they see courage, or will they see another carefully curated illusion? The boy from Athens has no grave you can visit. His name is lost, his voice erased, his childhood swallowed by a world that celebrated beauty and wisdom while destroying both. He is one of thousands, maybe tens of thousands, whose stories were never told. History buried them, but their absence still screams louder than marble columns or gilded words. And now, across centuries, his silence lands in our hands. What will we do with it? Will we turn away, as the men of Athens once did, comforted by philosophy while ignoring the children at their feet? Or will we finally admit that progress without compassion is only another mask for cruelty? You, watching this, are part of the answer. Every choice you make, what you buy, what you believe, what you ignore, becomes part of history's memory. The forgotten children of Athens cannot speak for themselves, but perhaps their story can remind us. Civilizations are not remembered by what they build, but by whom they abandon. So I leave you with a question, one that should haunt you as it haunts me. When the future writes about us, will we be remembered as the age that finally listened, or as just another empire built on silence? If this story unsettled you, it should, because history isn't only about the names carved into marble. It's also about the countless voices erased from it. And when we bring those voices back, even for a moment, we resist the silence that powerful men tried to impose forever. That's what this channel is about, to dig into the shadows, to tell the stories the victors wanted forgotten, and to hold up a mirror between their world and ours. If you believe these stories matter, if you believe remembering is a kind of justice, then stay with us. Share this story so others can hear it. Leave your thoughts below, because every question, every comment, keeps the conversation alive. And if you want to continue walking with us into the darker corners of history, consider subscribing. It's a small act, but it helps these forgotten voices reach further than the walls that once confined them. The boy in Athens never had the chance to speak, but you do. Let his silence remind us that remembering is resistance, and resistance begins with you.